Welcome to the Fourth Step Podcast. On each episode, we interview recovering addicts and learn their story with addiction. Through exploring personal journeys, we get a glimpse of the depths addicts fall to and their path in recovery. We hope you enjoy the episode. So, my name's Kevin. I'm an addict, and welcome to the Fourth Step Podcast. And with us today is our guest.
My name's Joel. I'm an addict.
Hi, Joel. How are you?
I'm good, Kevin. How you doing today?
You feeling good?
I feel good.
That's awesome. We appreciate you letting us come out to your place. We're actually on location in Arizona. Unfortunately, co-host Josh wasn't able to get out here to do this podcast. And I could tell you from doing one yesterday, I do miss him. He brings a certain style of interview that really helps out. So I'll try to do him justice. So first of all, when's your clean date?
7/21/08.
So you've got
15 years.
Dang.
Well into my 16th year.
Well into your 16th year.
Yes.
That sounds like when we were little kids, we were 7.5.
Yes.
So you're 16 and a half?
Yeah. No, I'm 15, and I'm well into my 16th
Oh, gotcha.
year.
Yeah.
Here in Narcotics Anonymous, there's no half years after a year and a half.
Yeah.
So one time someone told me, you don't have 15 and a half years yet. You're well into your 16th year.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember somebody telling me, no, you only have 15 years.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
But we don't have to listen to them, do we?
No.
All right. So you know the premise of the podcast, and a lot of times we just like to start like, what'd your childhood look like? I mean, as far as like being an addict is concerned, was there stuff growing up that you look back now and you see, oh, well, that played a part in how I felt? And then realizing that when you were getting loaded, you were covering that? What was your childhood like?
Yeah. So it was interesting when you first asked me to do this, I started thinking about what it would have been like if I would have done this at year 5 versus year 10 versus now in year 15. And because my perspective of what my childhood was like has consistently changed over the years. And so I through listening to other podcasts and just kind of understanding what the premise of this whole entire thing was about, I knew that some childhood stuff would come up. And, what's interesting is I used to always, in early recovery, would compare my childhood experiences to other people's childhood experiences because some people experience a lot different childhood and upbringing than I did. Grew up in a 2-parent home. Financial insecurity was an issue. My father worked for the union. My mom was a pediatric nurse. But they were very successful addicts. And
Really?
Yeah.
So they were addicts?
Yeah.
And you grew up
wanting to be a successful addict from a very young age.
And you didn't want for anything?
Never, not at all. Didn't experience molestation or rape. Didn't ever get abused or beaten. Never experienced like going from one home to the other.
Right, yeah.
Never felt that I wasn't loved. Had all that stuff going for me.
Wow.
Where it really, where things changed for me, Kevin, was prior to ever starting to experience insecurities, I remember just thinking my dad was the greatest thing since sliced cheese. And I wanted to be just like him. I wanted to work for the union.
So hero.
Yeah. I wanted to be able to drink like him. I wanted to be able to be the life of the party like him. I wanted to be able to, everybody to love me like they loved him. And my dad was the guy that, he was just a bubbly personality. And he was my idol.
Was he like getting loaded all the time, or was he drinking and smoking pot?
Drinking and smoking pot. And then, interestingly enough, they had a friend. Her name was Lori. She was really well off. And we would go to her house, and they would have these big, what I know to be true now, I didn't know then, these big like cocaine parties. And all of us kids would be running around the house, and there was a room we weren't allowed to go into.
Huh.
And we were like scared to death to go in this room. But one time I went into the room, and in the room, it was the white room. All the furniture was white, carpet was white. And I just remember I was probably...
And the lines were white.
Maybe 6, yeah. Maybe I might have been 6 or 7 years old. And there was a mountain of white powder.
No way, really?
Yeah, which I realize now was cocaine.
Yeah.
Like a mountain. I mean, and that was the first time I was like, oh, interesting, whatever, but didn't really think anything about it.
Yeah.
And then I became a DARE role model in school, 5th grade.
You're kidding.
No, and I was up in front of this class, and shortly thereafter, I went home and found my dad's brass weed pipe. I was really disappointed in him for smoking pot, even though I kind of knew something was going on, and I went through it. I'll never forget. I threw it out in our field in this little, drainage ditch by our house. He never said anything about it. He just probably thought he lost it or something. But it was probably within a year after that I was my first introduction to
smoking.
To smoking weed. I can't remember. I first drank at 9 years old, so I don't remember if I was a DARE. I think I might have been drank after I was a DARE role model.
What year was that? That's 80s, isn't it?
Yeah, so I was born in 81.
Nancy Reagan?
Yeah. I mean, big DARE push and the war on drugs. So the first time I drank, this is kind of a comical story. All my cousins drank. I grew up with older cousins, and I really wanted to be like them, because they were starting to party a little bit, and my parents were okay. Our parents were okay with us drinking it when we were out in the woods camping.
How old were you?
I was 9 the first time that I drank. So we'd go to camping in the woods, Labor Day, Memorial Weekend, out in the woods. We grew up hunting in the woods. So parents would be up doing their thing, and us kids we'd find some spot down by the river or something to start a fire and roast marshmallows. Is what we'd tell our parents. We'd be down there stealing their alcohol and drinking. And I drank a Bartles and James margarita wine cooler was the first one. Took a big old chew of Copenhagen and started to get sick, and then drank another wine cooler, and then puked my guts out all night long. All my cousins were laughing.
Sounds horrible.
It was. Cousins were laughing at me and making fun of me, and I got up the next day and did it again, and didn't even think twice about it.
Did you puke again?
The next night? Oh yeah, for sure. No Copenhagen the second night. I thought it was the Copenhagen. It was a problem.
Really?
Yeah. I remember that vividly thinking, the Copenhagen felt making me sick, but I was 2 or 3 wine coolers deep, and I was puking again. And from that point on, I really just wanted to do anything I could do to fit in with my family. So
that's a common theme for that we found, that like people that grew up with both parents and were never abused, what started them down the road was wanting to fit in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that fits in for you, huh?
100%. When I first realized that I started to separate myself. I mean, if you want to back up a little bit to like elementary school, I grew up in a really small community outside of in Southwest Washington, small, like a few hundred people. My school actually had 1st and 2nd grade were together in the same classroom, and I went to school there until the 2nd grade, and I was picked on and bullied, and I got into wrestling at a really young age. My dad wanted me to wrestle because I was getting picked on in school, and so I could be tougher, and so I started to gain a little bit of confidence in myself, but we lived in a trailer park outside of the city, kind of like a country club trailer park thing, or outside of the town anyways. And so all the kids that grew up in the little town were all friends growing up, and I was kind of separated. So I would get bussed into school, and they were all buddies, and I wasn't. And so I was kind of outside looking in, and they would pick on me and beat me up and different things. And then we moved from that little town in Vader, Washington, to Longview. And so then I was a new kid at a new school in the 3rd grade, and everybody was clicked up, and I was trying to find my way into the group, and I just started fighting. Like that was what I started to do, and I was a good wrestler, and so I was became the tough guy. And then probably about 8 years old, maybe a little bit younger. Shortly after getting into Longview, I started hanging out with my cousins that were in town, and we were changing our clothes to go swimming. And my cousins were like 12, 13, 14, somewhere in there, and they'd experienced puberty and I hadn't yet. And I remember sitting on the floor, really self-conscious about changing my clothes in front of all of them. And they had pubic hair, and they had, experienced puberty, and they were starting to get, some larger male genitalia. And I was just really insecure with what was going on. And that's when, in retrospect, I didn't know that until probably year 4 or 5 of recovery, that was such an instrumental piece of my upbringing. But I realized that's when I started to struggle with sexual insecurities, because I was, in this place of comparison.
Yeah, and developed as fast as
and 8, you're not developed yet.
No.
You're not at that point. And so then a lot of, sexual insecurities growing up. And so in order to mask these insecurities I had around my masculinity and being a man is, and I just continued to be this tough guy.
Huh.
And, was always in trouble beating kids up.
Yeah, so that's interesting that you grew up getting picked on, and then you eventually became a bully?
100%, yeah.
Yeah.
I just made that transition.
Yeah, that's a common transaction for some people. They're getting picked on, and then later on in life they became, that bully just out of survival skill, right? Because that's what they know. What about looking back now? Do you find yourself, or when you've done step work around that, did you find any like shame and guilt around the bullying kids?
Oh, that's a whole bunch of stuff associated with that.
Yeah?
Yeah, 100%.
Like what?
I mean, I could tell you story after story after story after story of where I assaulted my friends, where I assaulted good kids, where I, just so many things where there's so many amends to make for people that I harmed back in the day.
Yeah.
That my amends today is just not to harm people anymore. Like that's the extent of it. Like
that's your living clean.
Just my living amends.
Yeah.
I think, some things I really feel guilty about was kids who were new to school that I would pick on. And then when I in retrospect look back to how I felt when I was getting picked on when I first got to school, or when I was getting picked on when I was in first and second grade, there's definitely some shame and guilt around that. I've moved to a place of forgiveness of myself for that now, but not some of my finer moments at all. And what's interesting, Kevin, is that I thought that the kids that were around me thought that it was cool, like my so-called friends.
Right.
But they really didn't. And talking to them after the fact, like as now that we're adults, I realized that they were actually not amused by my behavior at all. They actually thought it was ridiculous.
Well, what'd you expect?
Yeah, but I thought it was cool. They thought it was cool because they would cheer me on, and they thought I was this big bully tough guy. And so what I was trying to do, I mask all this insecurity and be like some tough guy and get people's respect and attention, was actually doing the opposite. They looked at me as being less than. And so that's an interesting way to be able to see it now, that what I was trying to do did the exact opposite.
Change of perspective.
Yes.
Yeah, I hear you. There's that factor that you looking back now, you can see what you're talking about is the fact that you being a bully to these kids, that changed the way you felt from being bullied, right? So there's some kind of pattern, right? We grow up with these patterns. What about the first time you got loaded?
So I was probably maybe 10 or 11, somewhere in there. My cousins, some of the same older cousins, my cousin Jake in particular, was like my idol. He was, my dad's identical twin, and my dad's twin brother married a Hawaiian. And so my cousin Jake was a Hawaiian kid, and super good looking kid. All the girls loved him. And I wanted to be like him. So I would do what he did and want to follow along with him, but I was just always the little, kind of dorky cousin that was, I'm 4 or 5 years younger than he is, something like that, maybe a little bit, 4 or 5 years younger. So I found out that him and this kid Brian that we were used to hunt with, and our families are still really close, that they were going out to sneak away at hunting camp and go smoke some weed. And I found out that that's what they were going to go do. And so now I knew what they were going to go do. And so they had to rope me into to using, or I was going to tell on them.
Blackmail.
So they said, that's when they told me, they go, well, your parents smoke weed. How can they tell you not to? And I said, well, I'm not an adult. And we had this whole banter back and forth. And I was trying to convince them that it wasn't a good idea that I go. And they were trying to convince me that it was going to be okay. And we bantered back and forth for a long period of time. And finally, my mom came walking back across from we had like an elk shack where everyone kind of congregated at.
Right.
And she was walking, and they took off running, and I didn't want to be caught in this weird dilemma of like, what are you doing? And so I ran with them and ended up in the rock pit. And I'll never forget, it was a brass purple. It was like brass, and then it had a purple piece and brass and a purple and one of those little
pipes,
pipe, like a metal pipe. but I remember it to a T exactly what it looked like and everything.
No shit.
Yeah. And
we used to call, if it's the same type, we used to call those brass ones prototypes.
Yeah, I've heard that terminology.
Yeah.
And so we went back and forth. Like they were taking hits and they'd pass me. I was like, no, I can't. And kept saying no because I didn't, all I could think about was what this was going to do, and I was going to get in trouble. And they basically just pressured me into it.
And you're a dare model citizen.
Yeah, all that. Yeah. So, but I finally gave in. And then just like the Bartles and James wine coolers before, the next day, I was trying to figure out how we were going to go hunting together, and I was going to be able to,
smoke again. So did it change the way you felt?
The first time, no. Didn't know. It just made me like my mouth burnt and coughed a bunch, but it didn't get high. But what it did do is it made me feel part with them. Yeah. And then the next day, I thought that they thought I was cooler.
Dude, I have such a similar experience. My oldest brother, I'm the youngest of three kids. My oldest brother, we were water skiing at Lake Shasta, and he's out at the dock with his friends smoking pot, and I show up, and he's like, you're going to have to let me smoke some, or else I'm telling mom. Right? And so I didn't get high, but I acted as if.
Yeah.
Because I just started goofing off and making people laugh, and same situation.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was that. And then the next day I forget, we drove out, we found some road to park on, and the area we hunted in was big, but there was probably like 20 different people that would camp at where we camped at, family, friends, cousins, uncles, parents, friends, all that. It was like a little city in the woods, and we grew up there, and we had so much fun. But we backed down this road, and out of nowhere, my Uncle Keith and his hunting buddy, can't remember what his name was, came driving down the road. So we're in there hotboxing.
Oh, shit.
My Uncle Larry, because we would drive in the woods when we were underage. We'd just take our parents' trucks and go drive around the woods and hunt. And so Jake was probably, maybe 15, and we would back my Uncle Larry's truck down the road, and then all of a sudden, here comes Uncle Keith down this grassy road to the end of this road, and we're panicking, and I'm thinking, I'm busted, and they just waved and drove right by Uncle Keith like it was no thing. Whether he knew or not, I don't know. But it scared me enough to where I was thinking, I can't ever do this again. But the next day we were, back on it again. And then the reality of it is like from that day forward, I was trying to get stoned as much as I could when it was possible. But I didn't really have the means, didn't really, know the people. It was pretty much dependent on when I hung out with my cousin Jake.
Yeah.
But it was about maybe a year later, maybe by the time I was like 11, I started to I came to the realization that if I wanted to smoke weed, I could steal weed from my parents whenever I wanted to and smoke weed.
So you kind of knew already, though. You had that.
Yeah.
You said you had that inkling that they were getting loaded.
Yeah, and I knew, but it was like I wasn't willing to take that risk. But once I started to experience what it was like to get high, then I think that's when the disease started to kick off in my head, and I started to begin to become willing to go to any lengths to get one more. And I wouldn't do it all the time, but I would do it, periodically. Yeah.
So saying that, the obsessive compulsive part hadn't kicked in yet because you weren't chasing it every single day.
Yeah. But it started to. And I remember I would obsess for like weeks, like a couple weeks, about how I was going to do it.
Was that second or third time? Did that change the way you felt?
The second and third time, I definitely, in the woods that weekend, I definitely got stoned and it felt good. It was like, All right, so you realized that changed the way you felt 100%. And chased it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that started your obsessive compulsive.
Uh-huh.
That's crazy. So part of the 4-step, like we talked a little bit about shame and guilt. Was there anything that other than, you had sounded like you had a really good childhood. Was there any shame and guilt that maybe led up later in life that you continue to use drugs over?
As far as stuff that happened in my childhood, or?
Yeah, or later in teenage years.
So one thing I think is it's important that really, so my parents used to always keep their pot in film containers, black film container, gray lid, pretty common for.
Very common in that day and age.
And I think I was 13, and I went in my mom's purse one day to open up the film. Well, let me back up. So they would sometimes start to remodel the house, and they would remodel the entire kitchen and bathroom in a 3-day period. like tear it out, gut it out, the whole thing, and they would stay up all night long. And I didn't really, it just kind of blew my mind how this would happen. They had some friends that would come over, and they'd be acting different. I really didn't know what was going on, but I knew it wasn't quite right. And they would do this like several times throughout my childhood, different things. They were, and then, so fast forward to, I'm going into my mom's purse to steal some weed, and I pull out this little film container inside of her, like some cream colored chunks of something. So I'm like, curious. So I break off a chunk, put it back in there, and I go up to my room and make out some little lines, and that stuff burnt super bad. And I played Mario Kart all night long until school had to come. And then I went to school and told one of my friends who I knew he was, kind of into like eating acid and things like that. And he was like, that wasn't coke, Joel. That was probably crank or meth. And that sparked something inside of me, Kevin, that I realized that I wanted to sleep less and stay up more.
Okay.
And that was,
so the speed got to you.
That kind of kicked it off. And I think might have been 13 years old, somewhere in there.
All right.
And so then I started selling weed. I would steal weed from my parents, or I would steal money from them to go out and buy, larger amounts of weed. I'd go to school and sell weed so I could make a little bit of money so that I could try to find a way to buy some
crank
meth or some, different hallucinogenics and different things like that. And that's when addiction really got crazy for me. Huh. By 12, I was caught in the obsession. By 13, I was using essentially whatever I could, whenever I could. Like if someone was like, hey, we can get some acid this weekend, I'd be eating acid. When the mushrooms would grow in the fields and the cow pies in the, fall months, I would be out picking mushrooms, skipping class and going to pick some, I can't remember what, not Kapinzi, there's other kind of mushrooms. We go out in the field, they grow, and we go back and make tea, and we were eating. So that's like really, things got, I was caught in the grips, right? Where the getting in fights and ways and means to get more was
so
priority.
12, 13?
Yeah, somewhere in there. At 14, my first big shameful experience, aside from some of the little stuff that happened, was that I got, it was my sophomore year of high school. So I'm younger for my age. So I might have been 14 or 15. I'm not exactly sure how old I was, but I got arrested for selling weed in school.
You actually got arrested?
Yeah.
Did you go to juvenile hall?
I didn't at first. I did eventually.
But not on the first arrest.
Yeah, not on the first arrest. My parents were working. My aunt came and picked me up. I sat in this room and they interrogated me for a long time to try and find out where I got the weed from. I still remember I told them, because snitches get stitches, right?
Right.
I knew at a young age you don't tell them people. And I had gotten the weed from a friend of mine's dad, and I definitely wasn't going to tell him because he was pretty hardcore. I was pretty scared of this guy. So I told him I got it from some some guy I just met through. I got his phone number and paged him. That's kind of the end of the pager era. But and I met him at the lake, and they were like, "That's not a true story." And I kept telling him, and I was like crying and going back and forth. And then to show, I guess, force or show like accountability, they put all my weed on top of my math book. I'll never forget it. It was my math book, and my scales and the bags of weed sat next to it. And they waited till it was like passing time, and they walked me in the back door of the school and walked me down a hall I didn't even need to go down, in front of all the kids, and they, to see that look, we got him. And
wow, that's kind of brutal.
It was, yeah. And what was happening inside is I was extremely embarrassed. I felt like I let myself down, I let my family down. Yeah. But externally, my chest was puffed out. I'd wiped the tears away, and I was like, yeah, look at me. I'm a drug dealer.
That sounds like the first part of putting on the mask.
100%. That was like and I didn't know that. Like I said, like if you had asked me at 5 years, I wouldn't have been able to identify it in that capacity.
Yeah.
But now I can see that that's what was happening. Wow. Because I've really tried to get down to the exact nature of who Joel is, and all this stuff, tough guy stuff on the outside, was never me. It was all a front to
I can relate to
cover
that.
up the internal stuff.
Because
I felt horrible. Like I was so embarrassed. Because I was a good student. Like I got good grades. Like I had, up to that point, like I probably had a 3.9 point GPA average. I was, and played football. I was like the most valuable player in my 8th grade football team. Most valuable on my freshman year football team.
But you were getting loaded then too.
Yes, yeah. Played varsity football my freshman year, which was unheard of.
Yeah.
Played, I actually, I suited up for varsity games, like the last 4 or 5 games of the year. Played in one of our state playoff games. The only freshman that played in the state playoff game. Started my sophomore year in high school on both sides of the ball, like beat out a bunch of seniors to play football. And I was good. I was a good kid, come from good people and had good morals. But I got caught up in this desire to fit in, and like the substances were the way to fit in. And I had like older cousins who could buy alcohol for us, so I was I took on that identity. People would call me and be like, "Hey, we need to get a couple of cases of beer. Can you do it?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but you got to buy me a 6-pack and you got to invite me to the party." And or they would invite me to the party. So I thought that I was like cool when really they just needed me.
They're using you.
Yeah.
Jeez. So that's the start of your obsessive compulsive and the lifestyle too.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're just like me. I was addicted also to the lifestyle.
Yeah.
And the selling and becoming popular, or the guy to go to, or all of that.
And to look good, and
yeah.
And like I said earlier, the reality, most of the people that I was around didn't think it was cool. They just benefited sometimes from being around me because they got to party or whatever.
Yeah. So you ever look back and at some of those friends and like they're off today, like successful business people or whatever, they didn't follow our path and the obsessive compulsive drug addiction, and how did it hit us and not them?
Yeah. I mean, I do. I think now I used to wonder and question that and feel like, why couldn't that be me? Why couldn't I? Because like I said earlier, I wanted to figure out a way to successfully use. Like
we all did.
Like my parents have.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you define it as successful or not, but without consequences, I guess that's successful in an addict's eyes.
It is.
Yeah. When the money in the sack doesn't run out and you don't get in trouble, that's a success.
Yeah.
So,
that's the goal.
Yeah. And, I used to like get jammed up about that. Now I'm grateful, Kevin, that wasn't my story, because the life that we live now is so much different. But there was a lot of times when I faced some significant consequences. Getting arrested was in school was a big deal, and I had an opportunity then to make some adjustments, but I didn't. I couldn't quit smoking weed. I had part of my conditions of getting back to school were to not go to drug treatment. This is what's crazy, is no one ever told me to go to treatment.
Wow.
I had to meet with
This is in the 80s.
No, this would have been the 90s. So
okay.
Yeah, so the 90s. So they made me see a psychiatrist, a drug and alcohol psychologist. Psychologist. And this old dude, I'll never forget. He went in and told me to sit down on this couch and ask me some questions about stuff, and then we would just chat about random stuff for however long. And I'd go home and smoke weed. And my first UA I had to take, so I had to take 3 UAs. My mom got to give them to me. We went to the hospital, and I saw that some Michigan State Wolverines football players were passing UAs with bleach. I don't know if I saw it on the news or the internet or whatever. Anyway, so I went in and put some bleach in my UA, and I came out and I handed it to the lady, and then she gave me some weird look, and I was really confident it was going to work. And we got up to the counter, and the lady came out to the window and said, "Ma'am," to my mom, "we're not going to be able to accept this specimen." And Mom was like, "Well, why not?" And I go like, "Why not?" She goes, "It's been tampered with." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And I remember vividly just the smell of bleach just, fermenting off of the cup. And my mom goes, "This smells like bleach." And she's like, "Yeah, that's why we can't accept it." And so we went home. My mom was so disappointed in me. And I felt some shame and some embarrassment around that.
Hell yeah.
But
that's a common thing when I was having to do UAs as well, except you would, because your PO would watch over you, watch you actually pee. So you would put powdered bleach underneath your fingernails, and pee on your fingers.
Gotcha.
Which is pretty awesome if you're trying to be a successful drug addict.
Yeah.
And not go to prison.
For sure. Yeah, that whole thing, that was an interesting 4 or 5 months. So I failed the first one, passed the second one with some stuff I bought from some smoke shop or something. And then I found niacin. It was like, that was a ticket. You could smoke weed up to a couple of days before, drink a couple gallons of water, and eat a bunch of niacin. It was like, we called it Vietnam in the pill, because you're just on fire. And it would burn all this crap out of you.
Really?
Yeah, and you go in and you could pass the UA. So I got my second one. I passed on that, and then I failed like 3 or 4 in a row. My mom would take me in, and I had to pass one more by the end of the year in order for my grades to count from when I went back to school after my expulsion to the end. And I couldn't quit smoking weed, and I couldn't pass. Like I couldn't. And my mom said, and if she was still alive, I wouldn't share this story, but she passed away quite a few years ago, so I'm gonna share it, and I highly doubt that it's gonna get back to anybody else, and if it does, it really doesn't matter. But she said, "Is there any way you can pass this UA?" And I said, "I don't think so." And she said, "Do you think you can type this thing up?" Because they had given me the printout from the UA that I had passed, and we had an old PC computer. And so I got on there and took that document and typed it out exactly what it was. The first one that was negative, and I was dating a girl, or I had a friend. I don't know if we were dating at the time or not. That her mom worked at the hospital, so we got a hospital envelope that said confidential on it, like they gave us before with the results. And we walked into the assistant superintendent's office like a couple weeks before school was ending. Sat down next to my mom and handed that over to him, and he was so proud of me for being able to jump through the hoops and pass all those UAs. And said, "I'm so proud of you, Joel. I'm really looking forward to you being able to play football next year and finish out your college education with us." And, and we, stone-faced lion sitting there, left there and went and smoked weed. And that was, and there was a lot of, shame around that. And my mom and I talked about it down the road, about how I put her in a position where she had to, go against her integrity,
right?
And
sacrifice her morals.
Yeah, yeah. In order for her to, help her son get through school.
That falls into the ways and means to get more.
Yeah,
right.
For sure.
We'll do whatever it takes. Mm-hmm. So, what about fears? Fears of some kind that you had growing up that you can remember actively changing the way you feel because of the fear?
I think fear of people finding out that I was so fearful. I think,
dude, that's heavy.
Yeah, that was a big one for me. I did not want people to know as scared as I was all the time. I could sit in my bedroom and cry all night long about things that were happening in my life or the way that I was feeling or people were picking on me, and then show up to school the next day and be the, what I thought was the baddest dude on the campus. And, but I didn't want people to know that. I was terrified of it. I wet the bed until I was like 16 years old. So I was terrified that people were going to find out about that. It haunted. And I was talking to somebody about this recently, about how much that impacted my childhood. Like I would only go stay at one friend's house because his mom knew that I had a problem, and she would help me out when I would have accidents. And it was real bad until I was like 12 or 13. It started to decrease after that. But I think the last time I was probably 16 years old when I had an accident, and not under the influence either. Just like, it's something a lot of kids struggle with.
I have a friend that went through the same thing, and there's a chemical that's not produced properly.
Something, yeah.
It's like biological.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It just hadn't developed yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're not that's not very unique.
No, it's super common.
Yeah, it is.
And I've sat, wow. I mean, fast forward to, a few years ago, I don't remember what convention I was speaking at, but there was a couple thousand people there, and out of nowhere, I just shared it.
Yeah.
And then after the meeting, and I called the gratitude line when people were coming up and thanking me for sharing. Multiple men and a couple women were like, "Hey, thank you so much for sharing that. Like, I've never told anybody that, and I really thought that nobody else experienced it." And I started to realize that I was not the only one who had been tormented with that fear of people knowing, or the insecurity on the fact.
How'd that make you feel?
It was freeing,
wasn't it?
It was freeing for me to know that I'd been, because that was one of those secrets that I wasn't going to tell anybody. Mm-hmm. I worked a couple of 4-steps and never told sponsors that had happened to me. And it wasn't until I finally admitted it and wrote about it and talked about it that I started to realize how much it impacted my life. Like, I would not go, like, people, they have sleepovers at houses, and I wouldn't go because I was fearful of having an accident, or I would go and stay up all night long and then make some sort of excuse to go home like early in the morning.
Yeah.
And so I could go home and sleep. Things like that would happen. Or I wouldn't drink. Like, I remember many times that people would like have ice cream late at night, and I would not eat ice cream and not drink anything because I was trying to keep my bladder dry.
Yeah.
And so I robbed myself of so many things growing up because of that.
The fact that you shared that at a meeting and other people were able to relate, I remember years and years ago, my friend Chad shared something about his childhood, being molested.
Yeah.
And that's something that the men don't admit out loud. And he's talking about it in front of like a large group of people. And it made it okay for me to talk about it. And that was 15 years in recovery until, kept that secret. And then the same thing, I was sharing at some event and I shared it. And as, I shared about being molested by a therapist, a child therapist. And after the meeting, the guy came up to me and said, "That was Dr. So-and-so." And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "Yeah, me too."
Oh, wow.
And then so he started being able to talk about it.
Wow.
That was like so heavy.
Yeah.
And the same thing we can do with any other experience that we have that we might feel shame or guilt about. When we share it, it becomes freeing.
Yes.
But we don't know about that ripple effect, how it affects everybody else. I shared the same thing about suicide. 28 years clean and I want to commit suicide.
Yeah.
And then a woman came up to me a couple days later and said, "What you shared that night saved my life because I was going to go home and kill myself."
Yeah.
That's heavy.
Yeah.
So that was like fear when you're getting loaded. What about fear now in recovery?
Oh man, there's so many different components that have changed. I think that a common theme throughout, for me is that fear that I'm not going to live up to the expectations or live up to what my expectation of myself was before. So my expectation before was I was going to become a union longshoreman. And I was going to make, a couple $100,000 a year, and I was going to retire with this $10,000, $12,000 a month pension and medical insurance the rest of my life. And I pissed all that away, in active addiction. Like I had that opportunity and gave that away for a sack of dope and one more. And so I live in a lot of fear around the fact that I'm never going to achieve that level of status and stability. And so it drives me. I think sometimes it is an asset, but the way that I torment myself around it is not. It's a character defect because I'm super ambitious because of it. Because I'm trying to get to this level of stability where I don't have anything to worry about the rest of my life. Like, like my dad. My dad has nothing to worry about. He has pension till he dies, medical benefits till he dies, and nothing to worry about at all. So that's something like I have a lot of financial fear associated with that. Like I'm trying to get to a place in my life where I don't have to worry about that. That's, a fear component. Fear that some stuff from my past will come up. Like I still at times, even though I didn't do anything. Stuff
that like you were never arrested for?
Yeah. And I'm just finally now, Kevin, at the 15-year mark, starting to realize that I never did anything that would still be under a statute of limitations. Like
I was going to say 7 years.
Yeah, I never committed any crimes that are like crimes that they're not going to be able to. They're never going to go away. But
either that or they'll never find the bodies.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, unfortunately, I have had thoughts of what it would be like to take somebody out in the backwoods and bury them in a roll of carpet, but never done it. So I don't have any of those things haunting me.
I don't either.
But I still worry about things catching up with me. I still have a lot of fear that they're going to quote unquote find out who I am.
Yeah.
With my career path and the hoops that I've had to jump through in order to be on the professional track that I'm on, I've had, I'll always have to check the box more than likely, because, some of my stuff, I don't know that I'll be able to get it expunged or.
Have you started the ball rolling?
No, I still got some, there's some fear around that, what that looks like. Like, I don't, I think it's getting easier as time goes on.
There's I'll just tell you from experience with my sponsor's story, there's no negative outcome.
Yeah.
Because as far as you have right now, it's still on your record.
Yeah.
The only outcome is going to be positive, that it comes off.
True. Very true.
Yeah. So nothing bad's going to happen to you for trying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, there's a lot of truth to that. And so I will at some point. There's been a lot of people around me recently who've been motivating me. Like I've been seeing it happen for them.
Yeah.
A friend of mine, Cerise out of Southern Oregon, she just got 2 Measure 11 crimes, which are in Oregon are mandatory minimum crimes for assault. She actually got those withdrawn or expunged off of her record.
Yeah.
So she no longer has to even has those on her record. So there's hope. There's a lot of hope out there.
There is.
Yeah. Another piece of fear that always gets me now is that when I'm applying for a new job, that they're going to I'll get the job and I'll be doing really well and they'll love me and I'll be 3, 4, 5, 6 months in the job and I'll still be fearful that they're going to find out who I really am and they're going to fire me.
When that fear of find out who you really are you talking about like your record?
Like my past, yeah.
So do you tell them about your record or your past?
Sometimes and sometimes not.
Yeah.
But the crazy thing is, which is really funny, is if you Google my name, the first thing that comes up, well, one of the first things, I mean, there's a bunch of different things that come up, but
wait, before you go on, if you Google your name now, one of the things that comes up is your book.
Yes. Yeah.
That you just published.
Yes, the book comes up, but also a story about me coming out of prison and starting a nonprofit a year and a half after being out, and then it gives a whole story, and there's like news articles, and there's all stuff of it tells all that stuff, and so it's all good stuff, but it still says this guy's a convict and did this, and so that's always there, and so the reality of it is that what I need to do is get to a place of faith that actually makes me a better person than
it is, Joel. I'll tell you from being an employer, those types of stories, those are more beneficial for people as far as looking to hire, because they see the motivation for change, right?
Yeah.
So what about your book? If you want to, you can plug your book.
Yeah. So yeah,
or please do.
Yeah. So I think that the book project was just a labor of love. It's part of my amends process back to society. I think, my whole entire life I've been a soft-spirited, positive guy, but I got lost somewhere in the middle and became this negative, monster that alienated myself from mainstream society and what it was like to be a productive member of society and a positive individual, and created so much havoc that around to people I didn't even know, that I figured it came through prayer and meditation. I started, so it's 2024 now, so the beginning of 2023. I just, I've been on this, I think I'm on like 578 days of consistent meditation now. And in that process, in the middle of some meditation, I just woke up one morning, started meditating, and I realized that I wanted to write this book about positivity. And so I started writing, just almost like writing steps or writing a journal. And I'd pick a principle each day, and I the next day through meditation, I came up with the
premise.
Well, the name and like how I wanted it to be and how I wanted it to be set up and what my intentions were with it. And I wanted to, I identified it as producing positivity, 31 days to a new positive you. So I knew at that time that I was going to write 31 days, like a 31-day meditation type book, but I wanted there to be action involved, because I believe that, life is about reflection and action. And so, we can reflect on things all we want, we can write on things all we want, but if we're not putting action behind it, and so each day is attached with some sort of action,
that's pretty cool.
So yeah, so I just started writing it, and then I had this epiphany when it was all done and published, and I jumped through all the hoops. Like long after Joel is left this earth, the book is still going to be around, because the way you publish now is that it can sit in some database someplace.
Yeah, no kidding.
And sit on Amazon, and people can buy it forever. So it's like I'll be this living amends, this indirect amends. The rest, long after Joel's gone, the book will still be touching people and impacting people's lives.
That's pretty tight.
So that's part of it that's helped me free me up from some of the shame and guilt of those things, like those people that I talked about that I just imposed my will on for all those years.
Yeah.
Beat them up, insulted them, disrupted, good times and our school parties, family events, different things. Like, this is like one of my amends to be able to get back.
That's awesome. Yeah. So you opened the door when you said that if you Google it talks about you coming out of prison and what you've done. So in your addiction, what led up to like your first prison term?
So the first one, going into my senior year of high school, I had, I was like a star athlete on the football team. I started my sophomore year, started my junior year, going into my senior high school, top of the world, thought I was, big shit. And we were having a going away party for one of my friends that was going to go to college. And we left the party and went down to the school. We used to go to the school and play hacky sack and throw the football around and just hang out. We had this really beautiful campus and right across the street from the lake. And so we would just go down and hang out there. And these kids came walking by and they didn't look like us. They were at that time like goth was
right. Yeah, I get you.
It's kind of new. And there was only a few kids in school that, you know, wore like black and dressed in that gothic attire and stuff. And they were walking by, and I don't even know if that they were really like gothic kids or not, but they were just different than us. And so I yelled at them, and they didn't say anything. And I was just talking trash, like I was under the influence, been drinking all day and smoking weed. I don't know if I was on any other drugs or not. I'm not sure. But and I was just talking trash to them. They just kept walking. They didn't want anything to do with us. They had no desire. And finally, one of the kids turned around and said, "What's wrong with you, man?" And I took that as like he was calling me out. And I ran across the field, and they were way across the field. And I picked up a tree branch along the way. And from about 35 yards away, I threw this tree branch. And I remember it, Kevin. It was like slow motion. It just was flying through the air, like spinning helicopter. And boom, it hit him in the head. And he hit the ground. And I took off running. And I jumped over top of him, and I went and ran down the bank and jumped on this other kid and started punching him. And a couple kids had ran with me. And one of the kids that ran with me was fighting with the kid. And then I went back over and fought with the other kid. And when I took off running, another one of the kids that was with me ran by and stomped on the first kid's head. And so he ended up getting life flighted to, he had a skull fracture and brain bleeding, got life flighted to OHSU Hospital in Portland, Oregon. So it was a couple days later, I got a knock on the door. And if you back up 1 week before that, I had got into a fight with another kid at a party and broke his jaw. And because he went to a different high school, and we'd been beefing for a period of time, like back and forth at school parties and stuff. And so I broke his jaw the weekend before then. And so I was kind of on this like ego high. And then so this next weekend,
you're a menace.
I wanted to fit in, and this was one way. You. And so then that happened. So I get a knock on the door, and they arrested me for the assault the week before, because they had a bunch of witnesses that said I did that. And I actually admitted to that I had, got into a fight with this kid. And they took me down to the station and put me in this room. And at that time, I didn't really realize like the ramifications of what was happening. And they took some pictures of me and sent it down to the kid in OHSU, and they confirmed it was me. And then they came in and charged me with assault 1 and another assault 2. So an assault 1 charge, and they charged me as an adult. So I was 17. I had just turned 17, going to my senior high school. But it was like life-changing for me. That was, a major turning point in my life, where I went from this kid, pretty innocent kid who was just a bully and partying too much, to now I was headed to prison. And there was no way around it. It was like very similar time as Columbine happened. So it was like school violence and things like that was a really big deal.
Zero tolerance.
Yeah, it was a really big deal. And I went to another thing that, has come up through step work is the school was like, "Hey, we don't think you can go to school here." And then because I was so good at sports, they were like trying to pull strings to get me back in. And so they said, "Go and go to practice, and we'll see about school." I went to one practice, and I was like, at the end of practice, they came to me and said, "Hey, you can't come to school here, so you can't play football." And I was just devastated, like, just everything that I wanted
because
in life,
of your actions.
Because of my actions. Mm-hmm. But I still, at that time, like, was unwilling to accept any responsibility for it, because I didn't they were trying to say that I went behind him and clubbed him with the stick, and that's not what happened. I threw the stick, and I wasn't willing to tell. Like, I'm saying once again, like, I wasn't willing to tell on nobody. So, and that was a long, drawn out, like 6 month, 7 month process. I ended up taking it to trial, and because they wanted like the assault 1 was like 7 to 10 years in prison, and they weren't willing to budge. They weren't willing to give me a good plea bargain. So we went to trial, and all my friends showed up and were witnesses. They all told different stories. We made a mockery of the courtroom. I was unwilling to accept any responsibility for the fact that I was under the influence. If I would have said, I was drunk, I may have gotten treatment, maybe have gotten like some help.
Yeah.
But I didn't. I was in denial that I had a problem. I was like, no. And so they knew at that time that the other kid was involved and what had kind of happened, because people had said that. But he kept pushing his trial back, so he didn't go to trial or didn't plead guilty until after I went. So, and I wasn't willing to say that that's what happened. And so I kind of rode the beef out and ended up they gave me 3 times the standard range. So I got 42-month prison sentence. My range was 12 to 14 months. They gave me 3 times the standard range. And I remember the judge in the courtroom said, I should be sentencing all of your friends or every one of you in the courtroom to the same time Joel is getting. He just happens to be the one that's taking the blame for all of this.
Wow.
But you guys have made a mockery of my courtroom and you're all involved in this. So, I went to prison, and my first 30 some days I did an IMU on my 18th birthday. I'll never forget it. I was on the phone with my mom, and I was like, why haven't they let me out yet? It was about 2:00 in the afternoon, and they came across the intercom and said, Joel, called me by my last name, and said, roll it up. And my birthday present was I left segregation, the whole, and went out to mainline population in an adult male prison at 18 years old, and I was shook up, Kev. Like it was tragic, and I would roll over every night and I would cry in my bunk, just terrified of what was happening. But I had a nickname in high school. They called, because my last name, and so that abbreviated, and they would call me Big Whitey because I was kind of a big guy, and so that served me well in prison. And so I took on this. People would ask me what my name was, and I'd say my name was Joel, but they call me Big Whitey, and all of a sudden I was involved in prison politics.
Yeah.
And I fit in, and I was a big guy, and so it was easy for me to kind of click up with some people. Didn't have to do anything crazy when I was locked up, but definitely utilized that to help me get through prison without any issues. And I used that entire prison sentence one way or another. Like I was using whatever I could, whether it was smoking some weed or drinking some alcohol, whatever other substances. There's like some spice stuff you can eat, like some nutmeg.
Nutmeg, I remember that.
Yeah, so
it didn't get you high.
Oh no! If you ate enough of it, it made you feel like.
Really?
Oh yeah. So we would eat it, and so we would eat a bunch of it, and then you fall asleep, and you wake up like 8 hours later, and you feel kind of all droggy and kind of like you were high. We did a bunch of it, but then you couldn't poop, so it would make you constipated. Really? And so you would, it would be like. You go and you feel like you're pooping out like a monster, huge rock, but all you get out was like a deer turd. It was so horrible. But this is the insanity of the disease of addiction. I realized this through step work, is that once I would finally take a shit and feel better, I'd wait for the next round of nutmeg to come through, and I'd eat some more. And I'd experience the same thing. I couldn't shit. Like bleeding out the asshole, but continuing to eat.
Knowing that that's going to happen.
Knowing that's going to happen.
It's still going to do
anyway.
it. Yeah. That's obsessive compulsive.
Yeah. So
that's crazy.
Yeah.
So that's the first term. And you had more?
Yeah. So I got out. I had a welcome home party where my parents were like, you just can't smoke weed. But they didn't care about alcohol. I'll never forget, I got up on top of my parents. They had probably 150, 200 people there. Some girls came that I didn't know that were out, because all my friends were progressing in their life and using while I was locked up, right? So they had, they were partying now and whatever. Yeah. They were kind of gaining they had jobs and money and things. So they all come, and they had met some other girls that were strippers. And so these friends of ours ended up stripping at my welcome home party. My grandpa was up there. It was just wild. Like, this is a couple weeks out of prison. I remember standing on the top of my parents' motorhome with a bottle of Jack Daniels and a bandana on and a blue and white and black flowered Hawaiian shirt, giving a toast and thanking everybody who never gave up on me. And I almost fell off the roof of the motorhome getting down. That's how
I can just picture that. And you got strippers running around.
Yeah, it was. I was not destined to stay clean when I got out.
No.
But that's the insanity of, like, my family believed that, like, if I just quit beating people up and could pass in UAs for probation, then everything was going to be okay.
There's a little bit of some serious codependency there.
Yeah, 100%. And so and then things progressed. Like I was able to walk out that probation sentence, and that's when my dad got me a job at the union, and I was working at the port, and I was, doing all that stuff, jumped through the hoops to kind of have some sort of stability.
Yeah.
But I shortly thereafter, like, I met people when I was locked up that became, my drug dealers when I got out. It didn't benefit me going to prison. I didn't change anything. I actually probably got worse. Because now my first Halloween out, I got out, I think, in September. Halloween, I was at this huge party. I dressed up like a convict, and like I wore that as like a badge of honor, like I was a convict. And I rode that out until, I had multiple things that happened in between there. So I got out. So I went to prison a virgin the first time. Like I didn't have sex until I was 21 years old, until I got out of prison. So then I was like, prostituting myself off with random women and stuff when I got out, like just who knows who, trying to make up for lost time.
Right.
And getting, in relationships with a lot of women who were always under influence, who were less than, I'd say like bag whores, for lack of better words. That's what I would call them, just like dope girls who were super dependent, codependent, a lot of issues, and were just looking around for a sack. So I'd buy a sack of dope and go down to the trap house and pick up some chick who was like probably homeless, to hang out with me for the night. Or I'd go prostitute myself off to some old lady who was like the dope girl, to have some sort of sexual interaction.
And you were feeling shame and guilt at the time?
Well, I was super insecure about my not my sexuality, but my ability to like perform and things, because I still had that skewed perception from as a child.
Yeah.
And I didn't have sex all the way through high school, and so I get out now, and now I'm just like engaged in all these crazy, sexual relationships with random women, still not performing, like not having any meaningful sex. It was just like, it was just sex.
Yeah.
And they weren't ever satisfied, I'm sure, other than the fact they were hanging out and we were getting high together. But
how'd that lead into your next term?
I mean, when I got to, what led into it essentially is because I was just hanging out with these random, and I have some like stable relationships in the middle, like some girls who were good women, but they were always, their lifestyle would interfere with my using, because they were like good girls who went to work and did that stuff. So it didn't work.
Right.
And when I met my daughter's mom, she was young, and she was relatively, she still lived at home, and she was somewhat stable and everything, but she was just looking for a sack of dope. And that's how we met. And I didn't know at the time, I know now, that she was just using me because I had the hookup, and because I was like a wannabe drug dealer at the time, like I had the hookup. And she filled the void of like, she was this girl I could take around with me, and she was attractive. And, but our relationship was really unhealthy. And then when she got pregnant and I lost my job at the port, and she had this expectation that I was going to, be a longshoreman, have all this money. It got really bad between her and I. And after she had our daughter, and we were both starting using again, it was super toxic and unhealthy. And so, a lot of stuff happened between the release before and now, different things and different criminal acts and selling drugs and stuff like that. But things got really bad for me when they took my white card away at the port, said you're not going to work as a longshoreman, because I was using and making a fool of myself at the port. And then she got pregnant. We had Abby, and then she started to like go out, because now she didn't want me to sell drugs. She wanted me to get a job and take care of the baby. So now I didn't have what she wanted. Like I didn't have a sack anymore.
Yeah.
Lost my hustle. And then I started burning people too. Like at the end of the road, I was just like, selling rock salt and burning this hookup and do whatever, to get one more.
Yeah.
So I didn't serve her a purpose anymore. And she started hanging out with guys I used to sell drugs to, and guys we used to run around with. And I was because deep down inside, Kevin, like I really wanted to have a family and live like my parents did. Like I wanted to have I didn't want my daughter to live in a home that was separated.
But you're stuck in the the grips of addiction.
Yeah. And she was going out with other guys, and it got to a point where I got a no contact order put against me for harassing her. And at the beginning, it was like I couldn't just realize that I just needed to distance myself. It was bad. And then once I got the no contact on me, then she kind of had me, she had control of me, where the judge said, if you have any contact with her, you're going to get in trouble, and she's not. And so, Joel, you need to not contact her. And I wouldn't. She would contact me and say, hey, come over and hang out or whatever. And I'd go, and then we would get into an argument, and then things would go bad.
So she kind of set you up.
No, I set myself up.
Well, yeah, you made the decision to go over there. You knew better.
Yeah,
you're right.
I did.
You're right.
And I used to think that she set me up, and there's a part of it that maybe there's some bad in there, but like I think the reality is that she wanted what I wanted too. She wanted us to be able to work out, but it just wasn't going to work out. We were at two different stages of our life. She was, we don't have anything in common. We don't like each other. It was, it was just a fantasy.
Yeah.
But I kept going, and at the end of the road, I had 67 felony charges, many of which were no contact order violations, a burglary one, which was a Class A felony, and malicious mischief and some other stuff. And there I was, sitting in jail again, looking at a prison sentence with no release date. My, due to my past criminal history and this criminal history here, and I was just like broken. That was like kind of like the end of the road. And the funny thing is whenever I do a 4-step or talk to somebody about all the details of different stuff, I remember I always joke around. I dropped this 4-step on this police officer. She was always like, a small community. They all knew me. Many times they knew I was a good kid and they just wanted the best for me, and they'd be at my house all the time and different things happen. And in my case, going back to that assault case with that, when I was 17, it was like in the front page of the newspaper, it was like prosecutor wins long prison term in brutal assault. College-bound student athlete gets long prison term in brutal assault. Things like that was like in the paper constantly. Like every week they had an update on what was going on. And so, the police force knew me. So fast forward, these years later, and they'd been out to my house on many occasions and arrested me, were chasing me all over the city, looking for me. And when I got to the end and I was on the run, this officer called me, Dawn, and she arrested me a couple times. And she's like one of those good cops that really wants good for people.
Yeah.
And she called me and she said, Joel, called me on her personal phone, and I answered, and she said, Joel, this is Dawn. What's going on, man? And I said, and I just kind of like told her I was hurting. And she said, why don't you come down and talk to me? And I went down and I told on myself, like I dropped the 4-step about everything that had happened for the past however long.
Shit.
And so they had all this evidence now. It was like, I told everything that had happened up to that point. So I didn't really have a leg to stand on as far as like going to trial. It was more about just finding a plea bargain. But still at that time, like I really wasn't willing to accept that I maybe had a drug problem. I just, couldn't.
Do you think...
Go ahead.
Do you think that you telling this police officer everything is like a cry for help?
100%. It was my first. It was my second initial surrender. My first one, I went to a meeting with my Uncle Bob a couple months earlier than that, and at that time, I knew that, like, that was my first. He came down and talked to me about recovery. No one ever talked about recovery. They were like, just don't do this, Joel. But he had a bunch of clean time. And he was like, my mom cried out for him for help, like needed
wow, that's
some sort of intervention. Cool. So he came down and took me to a meeting. I thought I was going to game him down for some money because he's pretty well off. And he took me to a meeting and gave me a basic text of Narcotics Anonymous, no money.
What a ripoff.
Yeah, but now looking back, like it was the greatest gift he could have given me.
Dude, that's a huge investment on his part.
Sure. A couple weeks later, my car got broken into. My basic text got stolen. I vividly remember saying, I'm not meant to be a member of Narcotics Anonymous.
Oh, brutal.
And so, I used for a little bit longer. And so that was like the first initial like introduction. Like I believe that like at that time, like when the seed was planted. And so when I told Dawn everything, that was my like surrender. I was like, I gave up, I'd given up.
That's pretty heavy.
Mm-hmm. And when I got to jail, I slept off like a 6-day psychosis. The last thing I ever used was like 15 Benadryl. I always, people got these last like hoorah stories of just getting loaded. And I got this fat sack and all these girls around and
Benadryl.
Whatever. And I was like, my last use is Benadryl in the county jail. It's kind of lame, but whatever. And so I slept off the psychosis, woke up and went to my second meeting of Narcotics Anonymous. And that's when things really changed. I believe at that time.
Wait, your second meeting of Narcotics Anonymous, was that in jail?
Jail, H&I meeting.
No shit.
Yeah,
cool.
That was my second meeting. And then, I walked out that prison sentence so much different than I did before. So much different. I had, they taught us about how to be members of Narcotics Anonymous. My first home group was Birds of a Feather meeting of Narcotics Anonymous inside a correctional facility. We were of service. We had business meetings. We put on recovery events. We just did it all. And like, I told people right away, I'm not Big Whitey, I'm Joel.
So you weren't politicking anymore?
No, not at all. And it was challenging. It's not cool to be clean in prison.
No, I hear you.
Not at all. It's not cool to be the guy who's like reformed and walk with integrity and not get involved in transporting goods in and out of the facility. I had out of camp job. So I'd go out into the community every, 5 days a week, and they were always wanting us to bring stuff back in. And I was like, no, man, I don't get down like that. Guys would put our crew in jeopardy, and I'd say, no, man, let another crew do that. You don't need to do that crap. And so it was a challenging, but the greatest gift I could have given myself, because it put me in a position to be able to get out and then survive the fellowship. And so I don't know how much time we have left, but I think that kind of diving into some of that stuff, where some things I've had to navigate through in recovery, that around fear and around shame and around relationships and around sex and all that stuff in recovery, which has been kind of an interesting journey in itself.
But so you finished that term, clean?
Yes. Yeah.
And you stayed clean?
Stayed clean. Yes.
So you got clean inside.
Yes.
And stayed clean when you got out.
Yeah, stayed clean when I got out. I always say that I traded my 6-digit DOC number for a 6-digit clean date, and that's the most important number of my life.
I have met many members. When I say many, I mean at least 10 in my experience of men that have gone to prison, and one woman that I could think of that had got clean in prison and stayed clean. And one guy was down for 28 years, clean for 28 years inside, and gets out. And that was like, that's unheard of.
Yeah.
It's an amazing story.
Yeah. It's not easy.
So props to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
That's cool. What about, this is the hard one for a lot of us, is the resentment. Because I understand, like you said, you look back now and like you don't resent all these people, places, or things, but what about the resentment that you had when you got in here?
I had a whole bunch of them. One of the most challenging ones coming into recovery for me is towards my daughter's mom.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different things under the surface that, complexities of that didn't need to happen the way that they did, as far as, what ended up happening at the end for us. So that's still something I deal with now. Like when she reaches out and asks for money outside of what I already pay, there's something inside of my spirit gets uncomfortable. And it's like, it used to be that I would go right to resentment, frustration, anger, all that stuff. Now it's like it creates an emotional response for me, and I push it back down and say, no, I'm not living like that anymore. That's one that it's a continuous thing for me for sure.
Yeah. We all struggle with that, by the way.
Yeah. I finally, a couple years ago, I was in St. George, Utah at a convention.
Love that convention, by the way.
Beautiful convention.
SWAPNA.
Yeah. Doing some step work with not my sponsor. I was joking. I think you're probably like the fifth person. You're the third person that wasn't my sponsor that I kind of worked a 4-step with, in a sense, or shared a 4-step with.
Yeah.
Right? So I was with my friend Dan, and doing some 4-step work. I wanted to share some of my 4-step with him, not with my sponsor. And another gentleman walked over named John and said, "Hey, are you doing step work?" And I was like, "Yeah, just gonna sit down." And we stopped talking. Dan and I did for a minute, and then I said, "You know what? Let me share this." And so I started sharing about some stuff, some resentments I was still holding on to. And this is, I think I had 13 years clean at the time. And John said something that was really profound. And he said, "When I can move from a place of resentment to regret, then I can get to forgiveness faster."
That's pretty cool.
And I don't want to live in regret. That's not a place to live. But when I can get from the place of resentment to regret, I can get to forgiveness faster. And I was able to free myself of a bunch of resentments I had primarily to myself. Mm-hmm. Because when I would go back home to Washington and my family would talk about the port, I would have a lot of resentments to myself because I couldn't stop using. When I would go and I would intentionally not drive by certain places because of the way that they made me feel about things that happened back home. The way I felt towards myself about beating those kids up back in the day, and I resented myself for that. Like, how could you, being such a soft-cudded guy, impact those lives so much?
But not today, though.
Not today.
Okay,
No, and I'm able to move past that stuff. And here's a wild story regarding that situation is last year my wife I got invited over to speak in Denmark, and the week before. 2 weeks before, we were in Southern Oregon, Medford, Oregon. Both of us were speaking at a Valentine's event. So I gave my name out to some newcomers and went to meet and put on a phone list. And so 2 weeks later, I get a call at 4 a.m, Denmark time, from Medford, Oregon number. So I answer. I'm like, "Oh, cool. We're up, jet lagged, whatever."
Yeah.
And so I answer. I think it's some newcomer on the other end of this phone. This male voice on the phone says, "Hey, Joel, this is Drew. I used to go by Andrew," and right away I knew that it was that kid that I had beat up.
No way.
Yeah. So he starts talking, and he's going on, and I said, "How you doing?" And I was just taken back, and he said, "I called 5 years ago to the organization, because when I got out of prison, I started that nonprofit." And he said, "I called, been there, done that 5 years ago, and was asking a bunch of questions, acting like I was somebody else, just trying to see, to where you're at." And he goes, "I knew when I got off the phone that you had changed, and I knew that I wanted to be able to have this conversation with you. And I've spent the last 5 years getting to a place where I could make this phone call and be able to, have this conversation with you." And he goes, I've forgiven you, but I want to tell you that like I've been experiencing PTSD for all these years. You know, I went through a lot of challenging stuff and equated a lot of it to you. He goes, I don't blame you for everything. Like I know that your friends had stuff involved with that, but he shared with me how he went back to school and he was getting picked on by my friends because he got to go back to school and I didn't get to go to school and went there.
Right.
That's part of the reason why I didn't get to go back to school because he was still going to school there. And we talked for about an hour. And at the end of the conversation, he said to me, he said, I want you to know that even though I'm drunk right now, or I've been drinking, doesn't mean that none of this stuff is true. And I want to continue to have a relationship with you and get to know you.
Are you shitting me?
And I said, cool. And so we stayed in contact, texting, and I reached out to him and stuff. And then fast forward to this last August 2023, he messaged me and said, hey, I'm coming down. I have a training in Arizona. I'd like to meet up. And I said, cool, man, when is it? And so we set up a time and a place to meet. And he got down here. And Kevin, we sat down and it was like two old friends. There was no animosity there, no tension.
You're kidding.
Almost 26 years to the day later, after the assault happened, I'm sitting across the table from this guy that I had beat up and changed the trajectory of his life. His life was changed forever because of me. And I didn't realize how freeing it was going to be to have this conversation with him, to be able to get to a place of forgiveness of myself. And at the end of the conversation, I said, what does it look like from here, Drew, between you and I? Like, what happens? And he said, because I'm not really sure, Joel, but I really think that there's an opportunity for you to be able to help me with my alcoholism. And so we've stayed in contact since then. And I just show up for him like I would for anybody else. I don't tell him what he should do or what he shouldn't do. I just hold space for him. And I get to make this this direct living amends to this guy who I beat up, 26 years ago and went to prison over. And so it's helping him, but it's also helping me to forgive myself and work past some of those resentments. And so now I don't have any ill feelings because I know he honestly has forgiven me and I don't no longer have to hold myself hostage for that.
Dude, I got goosebumps.
Yeah.
That's when you're telling the story, I'm thinking, man, somewhere, something, your higher power has got their fingers in this and orchestrating this this event for you.
100%. And so I think when you think about 4-step stuff and when you write that first 4-step and all the stuff, just everything you've done, everything people have done to you and all the everything.
Yeah.
To get to it, I think things like this help me to continue to trust the process and know that it doesn't matter how long we stay clean for, we can move past all that ick that we were involved in at some point in time.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So because of that, you were able to, we talked about putting the bat down. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. So
yeah.
you no longer beat yourself up?
I not around that at all. And so there's, freedom in that. Freedom comes from that. Doesn't mean I don't beat myself up in other areas.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah.
Right? So that, the resentments that we talked about, were there any that had long-term effect in your recovery?
Some, I still, stuff with my daughter's mom still is challenging, and her family.
Still.
The way that they've treated me and kind of ostracized me. And now 3 years ago or whatever, because of undealt with trauma that I imposed on her and things that she experienced, her not dealing with
your daughter,
my daughter's mom.
Oh,
not healing, and then me coming back into my daughter's life after 7 years of being estranged. Her and I, there's so much hostility, resentments going both directions.
Yeah.
I definitely think that I have done a better job of practicing principles because I have a program and a relationship with a higher power, and she's recently got a relationship with a higher power, but no program to really run things through, no sponsor to run things by. So she's kind of running on self-will and trauma responses to past events.
Those are really hard to deal with.
So we're like oil and water, and we don't see eye to eye on things. And she always wants to be in control of things. So, 3 years ago when we went back to court over some child support stuff and the court didn't rule in her favor, she brought my daughter into the mix. My daughter was, would have been 14, 15 at the time, and just about to turn 15. And because of undealt with resentments. And then also on my part, I could have very easily said, you know what, go ahead and let her claim her on the tax here, because that was the hang up. She didn't, I never claimed taxes on Abby, but the statutes say that every other year you alternate. And I didn't want that to happen because we agreed that we would just follow the recommendations of the court. We weren't going to argue about anything. And I had to pay more child support, and I didn't argue about that. We were in agreement to that. And so I just didn't want her to win because she always won. I always just surrendered and gave in and did whatever because I had a fear that she was going to take my daughter away from me. And that was still a driving force for me. And so I was like, no. And the court judge asked me and said, hey, Joel, would you be willing to, the only way that I will not rule this way is if Joel agrees to, to just give you all the tax. And I said, no, I just want to follow recommendations of the court. And I did that slightly out of like spite and some resentment. It was the right thing. It was my right to have it.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to give in to that anymore. So, the super recovery man, like the real high road would have been, go ahead and take it. Like, I don't want to rock the boat. But at the same time, like, that's still being a pushover, and I don't want to people please people. So there's a fine line, but I'll be honest with you. In that moment, there was some resentment. It's probably like, you're not going to win this time. Like, you won every other time. Like, I gave up 3 years of my life because you were incapable of accepting any responsibility for anything at all, and continue to blame me for things. I gave up a relationship with my daughter for 4 extra years because you ran off to some other state and hid out.
Yeah,
from me.
I think I would have asked you at the time, like, are you willing to pick up the tab for that decision? Because I'm relating to you.
Yeah.
Because I've been in a similar situation as you, is that if we don't take the step back, big picture, and all we're doing is focused on what's right there in front of us, the consequences of some of our actions, even though we might be, like legally in the right, or whatever that situation is, now you can look back and go, just like you just said, the big picture is, I could just very easily have said, you go ahead and take it all. I was in a situation like that for many times with my daughter and her mom. So I can relate to what you're talking about.
Yeah. And ultimately, like, if I could go back and know what I know now, I would have just gave it to her because I've given up, the next 3 years of my with my daughter. Like, I've been for 3 years. So I don't know, it's hindsight's always 20/20. You can always go back. But I would, because I would much rather have not rocked the boat and just been able to see my daughter.
So that experience for you created wisdom.
Yeah, for sure.
So now you know what that consequence is.
Most definitely.
And what would you have given up?
Yeah.
A couple bucks.
Yeah. So
it's interesting that we...
Well, here's the thing, Kev, is that she found a way. She got it anyway. I never even got it. Yeah.
Figures.
Yeah.
I know.
She came, because then fast forward to the end of the year, she came in with some sideways whatever stuff, and I said, you know what, I don't want to argue with you, just take it. It's not that big of a deal. If I'd have known it was going to, rob me of my opportunity to see my daughter, and so I've never claimed my daughter on my taxes ever. It didn't even benefit me at all. So yes, it was a lot of wisdom came from it.
Yeah.
And so when you talk about resentments, I still at times, like, that's hard for me. Like, I catch myself feeling these strong feelings that are close to resentment, but then I have to, push them back down, not suppress them, but like get back to a place of God-centered instead of self-centered, and know that doesn't serve me a purpose. Like, one of my sponsors, and I don't remember if it was Anthony or Tommy, said, Joel, if you want to hold on, if a resentment benefits you and you can really, you believe in your heart, hold on to that as long as you want. And it doesn't benefit me, at all. No resentments do.
No.
But sometimes we hold on to them or they come back up, and so.
Yeah, but you know what? That's the tools that we get taught, right? Is, at least for me, because I'm the same way. Sometimes resentment still comes up. Like, if something interacts with my family, like my oldest brother or my dad or something triggers a resentment, I've learned, wisdom has taught me to drop down in my heart, the 2-foot drop, head to the heart. And in my heart, they're not out to get me.
Yeah.
Right? They're like acting out on a character defect of theirs, and I don't need to make it my own.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting because I relate to what you go through. The end result is, if we live in our heart, we don't have to participate in somebody else's character defect.
For sure.
So that triggers another question for me. The interaction relationship with your daughter's mom, did that start, or do you have fears going into the next relationship or other relationships? Are you like gun shy, or
So
how did that affect your relationships going forward?
Yeah, I mean, so she was like my last relationship in active addiction. So coming into recovery, and I also had, all those sexual insecurities, all that stuff. Prior to coming to recovery, I'd never had sex with a woman who wasn't under influence in some capacity, or there wasn't some sort of some sort of transaction. Whatever, I never paid for sex, but I paid for sex, one way or another. The reality was, whether it was alcohol, drugs, taking somebody out, whatever it may be. There was always some sort of transaction there. So, and all my relationships there was always transactional somehow, whether there was always something. So I didn't know what a healthy relationship looked like. And the last one prior in active addiction was traumatic, with my daughter's mom. It was complete chaos. So coming into recovery, yes, it did impact my, how I felt relationships look like and what they were like. And so my first relationship out of prison, I got into a relationship with a woman who had a lot of issues, mental health issues, was really codependent, a fixer-upper, like my mom would say.
Yeah.
And because she filled the void. And so we dated for a little while. And then I realized in the middle of a 4-step, like my second or third 4-step, that I had was selling myself short of what I was capable of. And what I was worthy of. I was no longer needed to let these sexual insecurities and this fear and all of my past negative experiences in relationships to impact the way that I engage in relationships now.
So do you, looking back now at that first relationship clean, do you see it as, at least part of it as, like you were comfortable in chaos? Like that type of relationship, the first relationship and being clean, looked a lot like what you had getting loaded. Was it dysfunctional and chaos? Not really. She was just super like quiet, reserved, introverted, like super codependent. And I don't know how to say this other than just to say it, but like I was relatively well put together. Early recovery, like still living in a recovery home, not making a bunch of money. But like when I showed up at a meeting and fresh out of prison, like all the women want you when you're fresh out of prison. That's bad boy, essentially, But I had some stability, and she did in some sense, but she was living in like a women's and children's transitional home thing, and just. So you guys were perfect for each other. Perfect, yeah. But what it did for me, Kevin, is it helped me grow. It helped me be like committed. It helped me practice, commitment and navigate through some early recovery, challenging stuff. But this is kind of the kicker of it all. So we separated, or we broke up as soon as it became Facebook official. The same day, she changed her profile. That same day, what I would identify as like the baddest chick in Narcotics Anonymous reached out to me, and was like, I was flattered. She was 21 years old. Like from the first phone call, I was going to marry this chick, and we were going to, make Narcotics Anonymous babies and have the greatest life ever. And a couple days later, we went and hung out for the first time. We had sex the first time we hung out. Then all of a sudden, the next couple weeks or the next week or so, she would say, "Oh, we'll hang out tonight," and then I'd be waiting up. And I had to work at 4 a.m. for her to call, and she wouldn't call, and she'd text me like, "Oh, sorry, I fell asleep." And then we would hang out periodically, and never no dates. Like we just go hang out at her house and stuff, have sex. I'd leave, and then all of a sudden I'd go out to this meeting out of town with this guy, and he says, "Hey, are you hanging out with so-and-so?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "You guys having sex?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Well, so am I." And I was devastated, Kevin. I was like, "That's my boo. No way you're sleeping with her." And he's like, "Yeah, and so-and-so." And come to find out, like, she was sleeping with a whole bunch of dudes. And I was just devastated. And then I went through this period where I was like running around sleeping with women who were still using. Like I took this chick, man, this girl that I hung out with in active addiction. We were like, we'd hang out and sell drugs together. And she wasn't doing drugs anymore. She was still drinking. She wasn't like, partying like we were before. And she was in town visiting her brother, and I went and picked her up and hung out with her at their house. They were drinking. I had like, 4 years clean or something. And hanging out at this little house party, waiting for her. She was super drunk. She puked. I took her back to my recovery home and slept with her. And then snuck her out the house. She was like stumbling all over the place. I was the house president. And
H&I panel leader, taking meetings into the jail, chairing my home group.
So,
Talking clean and living dirty.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't want to say that, but you did.
Yeah. So, and then I was like hanging out with newcomers and hitting on her sponsor and then making out with the grand sponsor all at the same time. Like I was in this little weird phase because I was hurt and I was needing to fill this void.
Yeah.
And then I gave up in relationships. Like I was like, I'm done, because my sponsor and I were talking about, he's like, maybe you're not in a position to really be in relationships. Like this is creating a lot of unmanageability in your life. And so I was done with Girls and Narcotics Anonymous for sure. And I went out of town to go do some service work with my friend Nick. And on the way down, he started talking about this girl that he worked with, and that she was going through a divorce. And he said that she was a medical needs liaison, and that he was like, they were trying to hook her up with some people, and I was kind of interested, but like I said, I was done with Girls and Narcotics. I knew who she was. I saw her at a meeting before, and she was cute. But
wait, what? So you had gotten a career by now?
Well, then I was then I was like working in a machine shop, and I had started. To go to
so
school. You
hadn't done?
Nope. I started to go to school because they gave out free money. If you didn't have a no tax return from the year before, you could go to school and they'd pay for your first couple quarters and they give you the free money.
Yeah.
And I was making like $11 an hour at the time at this machine shop, so I needed some free money to help get by. So I started going to school, and so that time I was going to school and I was working in the machine shop, and living in the recovery home. And Nick started talking about this gal, and I was interested, but I was like, no, I'm done. And on the way back, he started telling me more about her, and he said, and he told me her name was Jolene. And then he said, what's crazy about her? He said she has fake boobs. So I was like, oh, right. I got really attracted, interested about this whole, fake boob thing. And she won't care I shared that, because I've shared it at the podium before, so it doesn't really matter. But, and then he said, and then the coolest thing about her is that she was married to a guy named Dick, and her last name's Ryder. And so she's Mrs. Dick Ryder. And I was
Dude,
like,
that's not funny. Oh my God.
And I was like, I got to meet this woman. You know what I mean? Like, if you give me Mrs. Dick Ryder, like you got, so that's
oh, Jesus.
So we go on a date, Kev, and it was like the most beautiful thing ever. I was super uncomfortable. At this point, I'd never been on like a date or anything like that with someone who was like a good upstanding woman who it was uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable.
How long had it been since you had decided not to get in relationships?
Only a few weeks. Like I surrendered, and I believe, like, in retrospect, like I surrendered and invited God in, and God brought Jolene into my life.
Yeah.
2 weeks later, we're riding in the car, we're going to a meeting or something, and she says, hey, I need to talk to you about something. And I was like, what? And she said, so I don't really know how to say this, but Katie told me that you raped her. And I was like, what? And she said, yeah. And that was that young girl. And they had worked together. And Jolene, out of respect for her, went to her and said, hey, Joel had asked me out. I'm going to go on a date with him. I just want to let you know. And at that time, in that moment, she said that, she goes, that's when she said, well, you might want to be careful because he raped me. And I was just like, what? And so there I was with like all this insecurity, all this fear. I'm going to go back to prison. It's not going to matter if I'm big whitey or what. Like I'm not going to be able to walk the
no way
with these charges. And I was just devastated. And then I went to my sponsor and I said, hey man, like I can't go to meetings here anymore. Like everybody's going to be talking about me. He said, no, you're going to go to more meetings. And he forced me to go sit in meetings. And like he goes, if she's there, you sit in the meeting. You don't leave. I'm not going to accept the fact that you leave the meeting. So I just kept going to meetings. And a few weeks later, she went to Jolene and said, hey, I want you to know. Jolene was like, I don't see this in this guy. This isn't who he is. And I've asked a bunch of people, and this isn't his character. And she's like, well, it didn't happen like that. He just made me feel really uncomfortable. And but I still wasn't okay with that, because that wasn't the case. Like, she sought me out, I'm saying it was,
I get it.
And all that. And I was not okay with any of that stuff. But I just kept going to meetings. And then, I was doing some step work. I had put her on my 8-step list. Like I wanted to, and I talked to my sponsor about it. And I didn't really have a part in anything. But he said, like, if the opportunity arises and you feel it in your heart, like, you can go up to her and accept responsibility for making her feel whatever way she felt to say those things. And so it was the craziest thing ever. We were in a meeting in Washington. They always have smoke breaks, and she smoked. But this time at the smoke break, someone asked her to watch their kid. And I was the only one that didn't smoke, and everyone else decided to smoke except for her. And it was a big meeting, like 40 people, and everyone left the room except for me and her and that little kid that was with her. And I went up to her and I said, hey, I'm not exactly sure why, what I did to make you feel the way that you felt in order to say those things, but I just want to keep clean up my side of the street. And she said, Joel, you didn't do anything wrong. I was just jealous. And so like I got to work through that and come to a place of freedom around that, she was just 21 years old and sick and jealous. That
Did you forgive her?
Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. The sad thing is that she's not clean anymore. Her life's okay, but she's not clean anymore. Like she, her behavior in the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous kind of backed her into a corner that she couldn't get out of clean.
Yeah.
And so I always, wish that it was different for her. But and now, Kevin, like I found a relationship with Jolene that is built on spiritual principles that has helped me work through all my insecurities. Like I'm so secure in our relationship now. And I just needed to have like a God-appointed relationship to be able to get to that place. Like anything that's built on human principles or, because of like lustly desires or any sort of character defect is never going to feed my spirit in the way I need to be fed to work through all that stuff in the past, because I've utilized Jolene in my relationship to help me work through all my stuff in the past. To realize that a lot of that stuff is just irrational beliefs about who I am as a man. And she,
so true.
Yeah. And so she's been like a consistent source of growth for me. And we're 11 years into this thing, been married for 8, and it has not been easy all the time. Like not by any means.
So Jen and I have been married for over 25. We've been together for 30. And I could tell you the exact same thing that you just said. Mm-hmm. It's the healthiest relationship I've ever had in my life.
Yeah.
It hasn't been easy. And just like you and I talk about, those hard parts that we get through creates wisdom.
Yeah.
And they go, okay, we shouldn't do that anymore.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah. And it creates connection. And something
deeper connection.
Yeah, for sure. Something I've really been fearful about is conflict. Like I never had the ability to communicate effectively to work through conflict. Like I would just punch people in the face. It didn't matter. I punched a girl in the when I was 5 years old on the school bus because she wouldn't quit singing.
Yeah.
And that was my solution. I was like, quit singing. And she wouldn't. And I couldn't communicate that you were like singing in my ear and it was annoying me and please stop. And I just kept yelling at her and she yelled back and sing louder because, I was being a brat. And so I turned around and punched her in the face and got kicked off the bus. So like at a young age, I was incapable of communicating effectively. So I just assault people.
At 5 years old.
Yeah. I still got that thing that says I was kicked off the bus. My mom saved it. So fast forward till now, I'm still learning how to communicate effectively. And I haven't had to punch anybody in recovery, which is a beautiful thing. I've fallen short and a couple times and been aggressive and in service commitments and things like that. And sometimes
How long has that been since that happened?
I was a programming chair. I was about 7 years clean programming chair for our regional convention. So about 8 years ago.
It's about 8 years ago.
Yeah, I called out the whole administrative committee and the vice chair, and then came back the next month and made an amends for it. But I cried after I did it because I felt so guilty about it. Just still.
That's your moral compass kicking in. Good for you.
Yeah.
Hey, whatever it takes.
Mm-hmm. But something in the realm of personal, I think romantic and platonic relationships is that I now know that my way to growth and to be better in relationships is to have those uncomfortable conversations. Mm-hmm. Like Jolene and I will walk out in the desert, 3-4 miles. We'll go on like this 10-mile hike, and 3 miles into it, we'll start talking about the heavy stuff, the stuff that you want to run from, the stuff that you want to pick up your phone and swipe on to avoid. Getting down the exact nature of what's going on in our relationship, and we'll have those conversations. And it's not comfortable, and at times we won't talk for like a mile, but eventually, because we love each other so much, we'll start talking. By the time we get back after 10 miles, we've solved whatever dilemma we're going through, and we're at a much better place. And so I don't have to run from conflict anymore.
That's awesome.
So
I like have conflict. I try to avoid conflict at all costs, only because of my childhood and growing up, and part of adulthood is like conflict was all I knew. Mm-hmm. And in recovery, I know that I don't deal well with conflict. And so a lot of times, even as a character defect, I will run from conflict. I avoid confrontation. We've talked about that. My like my ex-wife, my daughter's mom, I just did whatever. Like even if I didn't have to or legally had to do anything, and even Jen would get upset at me for like paying the doctor bill that I wasn't supposed to pay or whatever it was. I just knew that if I participated in some friction, that I was going to act out on a character defect and cause harm.
Yeah.
So sometimes the healthiest thing for me to do is just to step back. If I need to leave a meeting because somebody in the meeting makes me uncomfortable or I feel threatened or unsafe, I'm an adult man. I got to leave the meeting.
Yeah.
I don't know what other options I have besides that, going back into character defects. So the next question would be like reservations. When you first got clean, and do you have any now?
None now.
Right.
My only reservation in my first set of steps was if my parents died. And 5 years, 5.5 years clean, my mom got diagnosed with cancer in October, died in January, and the thought of using never crossed my mind. And I knew right then that like I could stay clean through anything, no matter what.
You had 5 years?
5, yes. So she died in 2013. So I think I just celebrated, maybe I had 4. I think I was coming up on so she died in 2013. She got sick in 2012. I got clean in 2008. So I had 4 years clean. Yeah.
Wow.
I'd been out of prison for a year and a half. So yeah, but I saw my first step, my first written first step. All my first steps, but my first step, and that's the only reservation on there, is that if my mom, if my parents, and it specifically was if my parents get sick and die while I was locked up, that I would use, because I was locked up at the time. So now none. Like I've watched too many of you, and members of the fellowship walk through so much stuff that like I'd be a fool to give in to any sort of crazy pattern of thinking that says that using's the solution. So I don't have any.
So true. And what's interesting is when I had 4 years clean, I had a stepbrother who was the oldest, who actually protected me when I was a kid. He was my idol, like my living hero. I only felt safe in my childhood if he was there.
Yeah.
I wasn't safe around my parents or my brothers. Anyways, at 4 years clean, he died of this disease. And, I was devastated. And it only because somebody else had gone through it already and shared about that is that I showed up at a meeting that night.
Yeah.
And I didn't get loaded. It's the only reason.
Yeah.
Somebody else shared about it.
Yeah.
It's pretty heavy.
Yeah.
So that reservation happened and you didn't get loaded?
No, not at all. And I think now, like, I actually look forward to those difficult situations. There's something about experiencing pain and walking through it clean that brings me a sense of satisfaction, joy. Like, I that might sound weird to people, but I'm like prepared for everything that's going to come. Like, I know that my dad's going to, unless something tragic happened to me, I'm going to bury my dad. And I'm not looking forward to him dying, but I'm prepared for when he does. Like, I'm ready to feel whatever it is. Like, I don't push away from that stuff anymore. Yeah. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the difference between a cow and a buffalo, but cows have a tendency when a storm comes, they run away from the storm. Just inherently, they just take off running away. And eventually the storm gets them, beats them down, right? They just get inundated in the storm. And a buffalo, there are a lot of similarities. They're both herbivores. They both have hoofed animals. Sometimes have horns. But a buffalo, when the storm comes, they run right in the storm.
Yeah, I think I remember they faced the storm.
Yeah, they face right in the storm. They run to it. And so, I feel like I've developed the ability in recovery to be a buffalo, because I know that like when I run into the storm's going to pass. Like every storm passes, and the other side of every storm is bright skies, and there's always some beautiful moment that comes from it.
Yeah.
And recovery's taught me that. And so I don't, like, when you think about reservations, there's like nothing that I can't walk through clean. And I want to feel all of it. Like, I want to snot bubble cry, because I couldn't do that. Like, I was a guy who would roll over and hide when I was snot bubble crying out of fear of judgment. But today I embrace it. I'll do it in front of thousands of people. I don't care.
Yeah, me too.
Like, I love the ability to be able to feel. And so I don't want to say, like, I want bad stuff to happen to me. But when it does, like, I just embrace it.
Have you ever thought about, or have you ever checked out what your spirit animal is?
I've never checked it out, but I've just...
Would you think it would be a buffalo?
No, I don't know. I claim it to be a rhino, and I don't know why. I just like rhinos. I think that they're a really majestic, cool animal.
Yeah.
That's like conditioned for like difficult situations.
Yeah.
You know, the way that they're built and their outer tough shell, but when you watch them...
But you have a candy-coated shell.
Yeah, when you watch them, they're like real soft, slow motions, you know. And then if you watch a baby rhino, they're just like super playful and cheerful. So I don't know if there's any real meaning to that at all, but I've always rhino is my my spirit animal. So
dude, I grew up thinking I always looked up to the bald eagle, because it's just so majestic, like you said, and so that's what I thought keyword. And then years ago, I did trauma therapy. And part of that is like finding out your safe space and what do you see and I said that I'm in a redwood forest and I see deer around me, and the therapist says that's amazing because deer is a sign of a safe place because deer run when there's danger. So if you have deer around you, you feel safe. And I shared that with a sponsee of mine, and he started some trauma therapy, and he ended up, well, he'll probably talk about it on another episode. It's co-host Josh, and he ended up connecting with a moose, which was not what he ever thought would happen. And moose has a certain symbolism for him.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, about like steadfast and all that stuff. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
So you never know.
Yeah.
It might be a buffalo.
It might be a buffalo. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that resentment is, and you don't have any resentments anymore, and that resentment is past, and so you're pretty good.
Yeah.
Are there any consequences from your past that you're still living with today? You mentioned one, like your record.
Yeah, I think... Is
there anything else?
I think in some capacity, all of our consequences will always impact us, right? I don't think...
In what way?
I think there's always because everything that we've done in the past has changed the trajectory of our life in some capacity. It's forced us in a different direction. It's forced us to do things that we need to do to clean that stuff up. It's forced us to experience things that we wouldn't have experienced otherwise. So I don't look at them as being negative anymore.
So a positive consequence.
Yeah, I think that every decision that I made, especially at this point, because my life is so much different now. My life is so rich and full of so much beautiful stuff that at times I still will pull out the bat and beat myself up because of the things I did in the past that put me in the position I'm in today.
Yeah.
But so I don't think this. But then I put the bat down.
Yeah, but you don't live. Yeah, I was going to say you don't live in that space.
And I'll get to a place of acceptance. Okay, like this is what happened. But there's nothing that still like haunt me. At 10 years clean, I had to go back and go to jail clean because I ran from a charge in Alaska. So then that was something that I had this warrant out of Alaska. I knew it was always there, but didn't ever really deal with it.
Really?
So I had to clean that stuff up at 10 years clean, went back to jail and did a little 6-day sentence. And, so
in Alaska?
No, I got to go to Washington. They let me set up my in a cush place. It was funny. The judge said, "We're not going to make you come to Alaska, Joel. Don't worry about that." And so I thought for sure I was going to get out of it. And then she wrote me a motion, said, "Yeah, we're really proud of what Joel has done with his life, but he does have to do his time, but he doesn't have to come to Alaska. We'll let him do it wherever he wants to." So they didn't want to inconvenience me having to go to Alaska.
Oh my God.
So I did it. I found a little cushion.
So again, there's a consequence, a positive consequence for a bad decision that you had cleaned up your life enough and showed some remorse enough that the judge, gave you some leeway.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And then the hope shot is with that whole situation is I ended up, there was a girl, and this is something that I didn't touch on, but I've worked past it. And this, what I'm about to share, this event has really given me some more freedom on top of it. But there was a girl, this girl I used to date. She had a daughter who had neuroblastoma cancer who I raised. Like I'd be in her life, in and out of her life. She called me dad. And I was like part of her life. But when when she would get sick or when my using would get real bad, I would run out on her mom, and I was, not faithful and stuff. And when things got challenging, like when the cancer would come back, I would definitely not be involved in a relationship because it interfered with my using. It was just too much to go back and forth to the cancer center and stuff. So, and then she ended up passing away. And when I was in active addiction, and I went to the hospital to be there, her mom wanted me to be there. And so I got to the hospital, and her dad was there, her biological dad, who I had, he wasn't really around a whole lot. He was kind of in her life, but I would always buy her like fancy gifts, and he'd show up with like dollar store gifts and things like that. And so I would shame him. I would just make him look bad and to feel better about myself. And so fast forward to when I go back to jail, they only gave me like 1 month to do my time. I had this plan, like I had a bunch of stuff going on. I was traveling to a convention to speak someplace, and I was doing some other stuff, and it wasn't convenient. So like I had a short,
wasn't convenient.
Yeah. So I had a short amount of time to clean up this wreckage. And so I made arrangements in that county jail in Washington to go up there, set it all up over a weekend, took 2 days off work, told my work I had a family emergency or something, and went up and did it. And a couple days into doing the time there, they racked us out of our bunks because there was some drugs on the yard. There was 8 people in the jail, 2 4-man cells, little tiny yard, and inside yard, like a little day room area.
Yeah.
So we went out. When we came back in, they put me in a different bunk. And in that bunk was Haley's dad. I had not seen him since we pulled the plug on her, many years before.
Wow.
And there he was. I said, "How you doing?" And Sean, he said, "I'm doing good." And he wasn't doing good. He was, loaded, coming down. And so he was talking to me, and I just started talking about recovery, right? And so there I was, like, didn't even know that how that interaction was between him and I when we pulled the plug on her, how I was judging him and how I had treated him poorly. He was never on in any step work. I never had felt any remorse towards that. But when I saw him there, I realized that what he went through losing his daughter, even if he wasn't in her life at the time because he was using, still was haunting him. And here I was getting freedom because I was a member of Narcotics Anonymous, and I got to make this indirect amends to him. We didn't talk about Haley at all. We just, I was just there for him. And then when I got out, I made a phone call for him, called his girlfriend up, and
wow.
And so I got that interaction by going back and cleaning up the wreckage. Like when they wanted me to, like God wanted me to go at that moment in time.
Dude,
God knew
I was
he would
just
be
going to
there at that
say,
time.
man,
and
there was a reason
yes.
that you were sent there to do a 12-step call.
Mm-hmm. And Dan was always telling me, he's like, "Oh man, you're just going to do a 6-day H&I panel." And they let me take some literature and stuff when I went, and I was terrified. Like I never thought I was going back to jail. And it was like, it was, there was an amends process. There was an H&I panel. I passed out some literature, hung out and carried the message for 6 days while I was there. Yeah.
Oh my God.
It was quite the experience.
That would have been cool to see, actually.
Yeah.
All right. So here's a part of the podcast where we're ending up, and we want to know about, like, give us a crazy story, something that really stands out for you. Something that, like, I don't know, that'll blow our socks off.
Wow.
Something.
So I think, there's
like the depths of degradation, or the lengths you go through to get loaded.
So I want to share 2. One from when I was younger, when I look back in retrospect, this is how insane it was for me early on. And so I was probably 15 years old, probably 15, maybe 14. And we had this place we'd go party at. It was McKee Road. It was a little ways outside of town, and like keggers and woods, backwoods parties were a big thing from where we grew up at.
Right.
And so my cousin and I, we had some meth, and he lived about 3 miles from there, but through the woods. And so we would ride our bikes. We would tape flashlights on them. We ride through these motorcycle and 4-wheeler trails all the way from his house over to this party, and we go there and party. We do all sorts of drugs and stuff. Well, we ran out of beer early, and like I said, we were like the beer hookups, and so we got in the back of a Chevy Love pickup truck, me and him and my friend Dave, who just had a heart attack, 40-some years old this last year, and Dan was driving. Dan had this Chevy Love pickup truck, and we had a load of firewood and a keg in the back of the truck, and we took off down this road, and Dan was supposed to stop driving because he was super drunk at the bottom of the road. It was his truck, and Jesse and I were in the back, and we had our feet like pushed against the side of the truck, and I was looking over at him, and he was sitting crossways, and I was like, "We're gonna die, cuz we're gonna die," and so we're holding on, and we get to the bottom of the road, and Dave and Dan didn't stop, and Dave's like looking over like, "Stop, Dan, stop," and he's not stopping. Now we're on the paved road, and all of a sudden we slide off the road, and we start rail sliding on the side, like the concrete, and there's sparks flying up. And I look in the window, and Dan, and we're probably doing like 70 miles an hour, and Dan turned the wheel real sharp, and the tires caught, and the truck bounced back up on the road. And when it bounced, it started to roll, and Jesse launched out of the truck. Like
the back of the truck.
I watched him just launch, and there's firewood flying everywhere. And I held on, Kevin. Like I locked in, and the truck bounced, and I was still in the back, and it went over again, and I let go. And I remember just like floating through the air, and then landing in tree branches, and I hit the ground and just running. And in the midst of this is what's so crazy. I heard ting, 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 ting. Like I hear this ting noise. So hold that part. So I take off running out of the woods. Like I don't even know where I'm running. I get up on the road, and I look back, and the truck's heading the other direction. It's smoking. They're both on the bottom. I'm like, Jesse, where are you at? I'm freaking out. And all I can think about is just, our family that was my dad's brother's Hawaiian side of the family.
Yeah.
And they're like good. His mom was like, all I can think about is I'm gonna have to tell him that he's dead. I have no clue. And so I go running back to the truck and trying to help them out. And Jesse comes running up, and so we're panicking now. So now someone drives by, and they go up and get everybody else. They come down. We get the truck out of the ditch. We get back up to the place, and all we could think about was how are we gonna get another keg? So
because you lost your keg.
We needed to fill the keg up. We're out of beer now. We had the keg. We found the keg. After we rolled the truck and almost died.
Yeah.
And so then Jesse and I were going to smoke some weed, and I don't know if any of you guys knew about like knife hits. Like it was when I talk about it, no one really knew, but it's like you take two hot knives, heat them up, and like roll little pieces of weed, and you pick it up and you burn it like in a plastic tube. It was knife hits. It was
Never heard of it.
Really cost effective way to smoke weed. And when we were young, like we were trying to get as high as we could. So we're up there, and I go, we can't find the torch that we needed. And I go, I know where it's at. And he goes, what do you mean? I go, it flew out of the back of the truck. I heard it tinging on the road. So we leave this party, and we walk like 2 miles down here to road, and we're out there, and we find that flipping torch, man. And we go back up, and we smoke weed. So we almost died. And here we are just trying to, the getting and finding ways and means to get more. We could have made a pop can pipe. Probably people had other pipes. We probably could have done other stuff, but we needed that torch. And when I looked back, like, in retrospect, like I should have known then that I was an addict.
There's something's going on there.
Something's different with me compared to other people, because that's not normal. Like usually you roll a truck and you probably go home and be like, okay, I'm not going to party anymore. But and they went and got in their keg. They found some girls to drive into town. They got to the bar before it closed, and they brought their keg back up. And we all lived through that thing, man. And that truck ran again one day. The craziest thing it is. And that's actually the truck that I got arrested in school for selling weed. Like me and Dan, coincidentally enough, was that.
Well, it is a small town where you were at, right?
Yeah. So the other one that really gets me, man, is at the end of the road when things were really bad, and I had the people that I used to sell drugs to were now the people I was buying drugs from, and I was sitting in this trailer house on right on the street that you would go to the port. Like people would leave the Union Hall and go to the port, and I would always be driving my dad's truck or this car that I had and parked out there. And the dope girl left to go do whatever, and I was in the house, and I would watch her two boys for hopes that when she came back that she would be able to get high with her.
Break you off one.
And they were back there sleeping. And they had a change jug and these used to be like, they call me uncle, before, like I'd go over there and I would take care of them, and I would.
So you're a pretty common customer.
Yeah, but before that I used to be the drug dealer, and so I was at their house all the time. Like I watched them grow up. And they called me uncle, and here I was, like they had this change jar thing that was there, and there was a couple dollar bills and some change in it, and I had taken their fishing pole, and I was in there for probably like an hour and a half trying to get like $2 out of this jug. Like I was trying to I'd pull it up to the side. It was like a water bottle thing, and so you couldn't really get it like around the corner, but I was trying, and I kept trying, and then it hit me like in that moment, Kevin, and I was like, where the fuck, how did you get here?
Stealing change from kids.
From kids. And that was like one where I felt some extreme degradation, where I was just like, how did I get here? You know what I mean? And when she came back, I got a couple hits off the pipe, And I went home, and that was probably about 2 months before I got arrested, for the last time.
Yeah.
But that was like, that was a moment where I was like, that was like rock bottom. And then, also like my parents kicked me out. They gave me I remember they gave me like an eviction notice on a yellow notepad and said, you need to be out by April. April 1st was like the day that they were going to kick me out. And Abby was born at the time. And they said, you can stay here. Bree needs to go now. You can stay here, but she needs to go now. And, that's just the way it is. So I stayed for a while, and I'd sneak Bree in. And then we ended up on April 1st. My parents kicked me out, and we had nowhere to go. And so we slept in my car for a couple days. And once we parked in the back of my parents' field. And so like those type of things, like where the disease took me from, where I had basically like everything that I could possibly, get to those places. Those are like, 2 moments where I really felt like helpless, where I wanted to die. And those are like real degradation type moments.
Wow.
Another kind of wild story is I told you about selling rock salt to, at the end of the road. I sold a couple ounces of rock salt to this guy who I didn't know was a pretty kind of big time drug dealer. And so fast forward like 2 months later, I go out to this place to buy a couple grams of some dope. And, I'm in there and I'm getting ready to get it. And this guy walks in and says, "Hey, are you Joel?" And I said, "Yeah." And he walks out and gets on the phone, and he comes back in and he says, "So-and-so wants to talk to you." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, and so he's got the guy on the phone, and I was like, "No, I bought that from the Mexicans. It's not me." And so then they start surrounding me. So I had this Q45 Infinity that I had bought for $500 from somebody, some old person that out in front of their house. Nice car, but old and older.
Okay.
And so I get in and I go to take off, and this guy comes up and he's like pounding on my window, and he punches out my back window. And so I put it in reverse and I start backing up down this street, flying. This other guy jumps in the car like this, and my daughter was born at the time, and Bree was back at this hotel. She worked at a hotel. So we would stay there. She would like, people would check out, we'd just stay in the room.
Right, yeah.
So I'm trying to get back to the hotel, and I'm backing up down the road, going about 50 miles an hour, and I go to like swing it around like they do in the movies,
Yeah.
And I got stuck, and that guy just ran right inside of my car. And I
T-boned you?
T-boned me, and I took off and made it back to the hotel, and he went off the other direction and so forth. But so then for the next however many months before I ended up getting arrested, I'd go to pull up at places, and the car still looked good on one side, so I'd park the beat up side.
Hide that side.
Put plexiglass in the window that was broken out, and so that was the type of stuff towards the end of the road where where my actions started to catch up with me. I started to experience consequences where I didn't have a good name anymore, and people were out to get me. It was
yeah. Those are some scary places.
Yeah.
Last thing, what's your spirituality look like? I mean, you talked about prayer and meditation. We're not in a meeting. We could talk about whatever what does it look like for you?
It's constantly evolving.
I love that.
Yeah.
Right off the bat.
I don't want to like put myself in a box. Like I go to church. I go to church regularly. I'm not the type of person that is so stuck in my faith that I'm not open to talk to or engage with or practice in some capacity other people's faith or a different kind of faith. Like I'm not stuck in this box. Like I guess you could call me like a real like non-denominational, open-minded Christian with some Eastern meditation practices, like all kind of connected in one. I believe this is something that really has hit me this year that I heard in church that I believe really rings true in Narcotics Anonymous, is that there's no non-believers, there's just pre-believers. And I don't mean that in it was said in a Christian setting, and which made a lot of sense, in that setting. But I like to take it into Narcotics Anonymous and use it there where there's a lot of people who don't believe in a higher power yet, or don't have a relationship with God,
or will never.
But I like to say that there's no non-believers.
Okay.
There's just pre-believers, people that aren't there yet. Yeah. There's hope for everybody to have some sort of belief in a higher power. And so
I love that.
So I took that from there, and it's really done in like a Christian perspective, because this is what happens, Kevin. Like you and I, whatever our belief system is, when we live this way of life, we're carrying a message that's attractive to other people, that opens the door for people to ask us, like, hey, why do you think that way? how do you act that way in those situations? How do you always have such a positive spin on things? Like, we open the door up by the way we act. People ask questions.
Yeah.
And so it's not my responsibility to push my faith on anybody else. Like, I just need to be available for the pre-believers, whether that's pre-believers who haven't found a Christian faith yet, or haven't found a higher power in Narcotics Anonymous, or who believe wholeheartedly they never will, because they're still pre-believers as well. And so I just live my way, like, with these principles that I pulled from a lot of different places. But I find that, like, having a consistent 11-step appointment, like on a weekly basis inside of some sort of facility, which I utilize church for that, like where I can connect with God, is a great place for me. It's like a good routine to have. And like I said, I get into prayer meditation every single day and talk to God. And I'll continue to do that because that's what worked for me.
That's awesome.
So, I mean, that's and I think I struggle sometimes to how to be bold about that. But I'm not the type of person that's really outspoken.
What do you mean bold?
Like, if you're familiar with like a Christian faith, they talk about, be bold and be obedient and go out and prophesize and talk about, this and that.
I'm familiar, yeah.
And that's just not me. Like, I'd rather live. Like, I like to live bold. I like to spread positivity and spread principles. I don't need to go out and pound biblical principles down your throat to help you know that there's something greater than us working in our lives.
Yeah.
Like, I just have to live. And I can share stories, and I've got all this tangible evidence of a higher power working in my life that I don't need to go out and prophesize about other stuff like that. And so I'm challenged a little bit because, there's people in recovery that are really, outspoken, bold Christians, right? That are like, this is what they do. It's very evident in the things that they do, the way they talk, the way they live, the things that they post, that that's who they are. That's just not my style. And because I don't want to push anyone away. I don't want anybody to think that I'm better than, or that they're because they have a different belief system than me, that I'm not going to be approachable.
So you're pretty down with practicing the principle of anonymity as far as spiritual belief goes?
Yeah.
And if it looks so attractive on you, the people that are attracted to you because of that are going to ask.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because it happens with me all the time.
Yeah.
I go, I'm the same way. I actually spent years and years and years in recovery, not believing in a deity. I still don't believe in a deity, right? But I believe in the path that we're on.
Yeah.
I believe in the spiritual principles, and in fact, just as quiet as it kept, a lot of the spiritual principles that Narcotics Anonymous practices or Alcoholics Anonymous practices, you could find those same things in Christianity or, Buddhism or wherever else you end up.
Yeah.
But it gives everybody a chance to participate in this program.
For sure. Yeah. When we went on a guys trip, me and Dan and Jimmy and my friend Daryl, and Jimmy is super into churches. Like, wherever we go, he always wants to go and take pictures and go in and hang out. So
That's so funny.
We were in Utah, and we were actually in St. George. That was one of our stops on our trip. We were going to hike in Zion. And he goes, I want to go down to as soon as you pull in, you can see it. The temple just sticks up real high. Prior to this, I had no experience. All I heard is stories, and I'm thinking, they're not going to let us in, and yada, yada, yada. And we get down to the temple, and the temple, I know now you can't go in the temple unless you're, born Mormon or whatever that's how that works. But there's a visitor center, and so we go in, and they're having some people are talking, and we sit down, and there's this big statue of right in the middle. We're sitting down, and it was very evident that we weren't
belong.
I don't say we didn't belong there, but it was evident that we were just visiting.
Yeah.
And this gentleman comes over, Elder Tibbetts, and he says, welcome, and what brings you guys in today? And it just was really super nice. And he said, would you like to go on a tour? And so he takes us on this tour, and we go through this little thing, and it shows the progression of what it's like for someone to be born Mormon and go through like the different phases of life. Yeah. And they talked about humility, and they talked about love, and they talked about acceptance, and they talked about perseverance, and they talked each thing. Yeah. And I was like, all right, God, like, I get it. Like, open-minded. It doesn't matter what path we're on, what title you want to put it on. These principles ring true in all this stuff.
That's fucking awesome. I love that story.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is killer. That's exactly the point I was making.
For sure. And at the end of it, he took us out and he pointed out the temple and said, yeah, you guys will never be able to go into there and experience what's in there, but you're always welcome here. And he goes, can I give you guys a hug? And he gave all
man.
4 of us a hug.
Dude, that gives me the chills.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So, that just reminds me that even in what I thought were, individuals who didn't believe in other stuff, like he's still open to share his, perspective on
It's
things.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of the best lessons I ever learned in the program is that we can accept everybody, like whatever their belief system is, because we benefit from that, right? The saying, diversity is our strength. So,
Yeah.
well, Joel, I really appreciate you coming out. I'm coming to you this time, which is really cool that you invited us into your home. And
Yeah. It's an honor and privilege.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was thinking, I was like, man, I don't know if I got enough like the dirty stuff, childhood trauma and all the chaos that has happened compared to other people. But there, once again, that's, my brain trying to separate me from others and compare instead of just identification.
The story that you gave opens it up for other people that have the same story to identify with you.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's the purpose, right?
Yeah.
So very cool. I appreciate everything that you do in the community too.
Yeah, most definitely. It's an honor and privilege, Kevin. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we hope you enjoyed that episode. Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. Often you will hear addicts referring to a specific 12-step program or rehab. These are personal stories. We do not represent any of the programs.